Hi everyone, my name is Matthew Whitfield and I am one of the career coaches here at LHH. And I am going to be walking you through the fun area of Technostress. So just as a quick heads up, the session is being recorded. So there will be some breakout rooms and some interaction throughout the workshop, and that will not be recorded. So anything you do say in the breakout rooms, please keep confidential between yourselves. So let me just run through a little bit of etiquette, just to kind of get things up and running, and then I'll start getting to the meat of things. We do have quite a few people still joining, so if anyone does join halfway through and I look a bit shocked, that would be why. So let's just let everyone in. So a few little things. So while we're having our initial discussions, please stay on mute while listening. The session is going to be recorded. However, I do want this session to be interactive. So if you do want to put anything in the chat, or if you want to come off mute and ask me a question at the end of the slides, more than happy to do so. So we want to really use this to help you digest information, reflect on these kind of the knowledge that we're talking about. If there are any technical issues, look at your joining instructions. And again, please maintain confidentiality. We want this a good space to share things and real life experiences, but please only share what you feel comfortable sharing. So any questions on that before I jump on? Nope, okay then. So what are we going to cover today? So we're gonna do a bit of introduction really, and then we're going to be looking at what is technostress, why should we care about technostress, the symptoms of technostress, the stress performance curve, coping strategies for technostress, and possible follow-up actions. So that's going to be the main bulk of what we're covering today. So what is technostress? Well, technostress, I would love to say, is a really simple thing, but it gets infinitely more complicated the more we look into it. So the definition of technostress is when technology becomes a stressor that has a negative impact, which is often made up of all the points below. So technostress is an umbrella term, and we use it to cover areas such as techno invasion, which is the fast pace of technology and change, resulting in too much technology, both in the workplace and personal life. Often what we see with this is we see people feeling a bit overwhelmed. We see people where they're almost glued on it, well, unable to feel they can escape this technology. They're always contactable 24 hours a day. And this has a little bit of an overlap with an area called techno overload, which is often when you have too much going on, you've got too much stimuli at any one point. So for example, this can be many emails coming through, notifications on your phone, your laptop or computer you're using is asking you to look at antivirus software or something like that. And it just keeps popping up again and again. And there's so much stimulation at any one time that you start to feel overloaded because your cognitive resources cannot adapt to all these different areas. The next is techno unreliability. And I think this is probably the one that people relate to the most, which is when technology suffers from errors, it's overly complex, it breaks down a lot, the software or the hardware has issues. And this is something that initially can cause a lot of frustration with those who are getting used to technology. And in a workplace where technology has become more and more important, keeping up to date with all of this is really important as well. One big example of this was actually when Zoom got implemented, when we've all had to go virtual. Lots of people struggled with using it. They found it unreliable. They didn't understand it. And when I talk about other areas, for example, techno complexity, which is when you talk about a lack of proper training, technical support, or perhaps the documentation's not there, people did struggle with that with Zoom. They did find it very difficult. So that's just one example. Zoom is a great one because I think a lot of people, where we were in the workplace, we had IT teams that were around to help us. We had colleagues we could quickly ask. But when we went virtual, what we needed to deal with on a day-to-day basis completely changed. The last two areas I'm going to cover under the Technostress umbrella, and there are many more, but these are the ones that I think are the most pertinent. Techno insecurity. So being afraid to stay on top because of lacking technical knowledge. Now, often you will do this to try and avoid looking silly or not knowing something. So actually you're insecure about using technology. And this can often be reflected more and more in the current workplace, where we're seeing people go, I don't want to use that technology. I don't trust it. I don't want to work with it. That's happening a lot more. Now, the last one is actually a new area, which is quite fascinating. It talks about techno dependence. So this is a little bit of the reverse side, actually, which is when people become so involved with technology that they feel stressed when this is removed. So this is a lot more common since we are returning to work, where we are stepping away from an increased period of technology usage to very little. And people are actually missing the screens, the ability to mute in conversations, turn off video. It's that kind of flexibility that people start to miss. And all of that does actually sit under the Technostress umbrella. So that's a very brief introduction to Technostress and what it actually is in a nutshell as an umbrella term. However, some of the more technical, was there a question?
Okay.
No? Okay. So when we look at what is technostress, so technostress occurs when there is a negative psychological relationship between people and technology. So this is something really important because actually we're not talking about necessarily the ins and outs of the technology. It's the relationship that people have formed with that technology. And it is a negative relationship. Whereas a lot of technology is there to ensure that we have a better quality of life, it's quite key to be aware that it can cause a number of stresses. And this happens through an altered set of habits being brought about through technology that are affecting you at both work and home. So some examples of this is Outlook with your emails, skyboxes, computers, iPads, your work phone. You might have software updates going on any of those. You might find that something doesn't work. And actually, when that starts happening, there's that bit more of a struggle because we're trying to understand, A, what's going wrong with technology, and then it's having an impact on us. So one really good example of this, which you've probably all heard of, is the blue light from screens. It actually had an impact where it was making people less sleepy. So, and the quality of sleep people were getting once they've used their phone very late into the night is noticeably worse. So that is one area, but another one is the impacts of feeling that they cannot escape. So it's that technology is always there. It's always trying to have an impact. And that's something that's happening more and more. So the result of this is technology starts to interfere with an individual's thoughts and their ability to cope with the way technology has affected our lives. So that's a bit of a broad definition of technostress in terms of a bit more scientific rather than different areas. But what does this actually look like? So I've got some real life examples here. So feeling a constant need to update the latest information or become outdated, and this can result in feeling overloaded. It's when a lot of people around the time Love Island and all that was on the telly, people want to keep up to date with it because actually they weren't as relevant in conversations, they couldn't get involved in conversations, and they felt they had to be involved. So there are lots of different areas where the constant need for updates can be quite overloading. And this can apply all the way across to people working on the stock exchange or doing stock exchange for fun, where they're constantly trying to deal with a large amount of information, and it can result in them feeling quite overloaded. A constant need to share updates and information to be part or relevant. Now, as we all know, dopamine is the reward hormone, and we often exhibit this when we get thumbs up, we get likes, we get comments on any post we put out, be that LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, whatever it will be. And it's that feeling relevant, that constant need to keep sharing these updates to get this dopamine hit is quite interesting, because we've got a platform now where you can share things to more and more people, and you can get likes and comments from people you've never met. So your presence online can be far bigger than what it is in person. And some people, if you look at influencers, they'll go on holidays and they will actually be, how do I post the best picture? What do I do here? So while that is an extreme version of some of the technostress that we will see on a day-to-day basis, it's a really good example of where some people are sitting with this. Feeling they have to respond in real time no matter what they are doing. And this is a really interesting one, because if you've got emails, calls, your own workload, and that's going on in your work day, and you finish work and your family are messaging, you've got someone trying to get hold of you, you've got people knocking on the door as well, you've got all these different areas, well, actually, you're going to feel quite overwhelmed. And that, again, you only have so many cognitive resources you can give at any one point. So all of these things are starting to draw on them. And this is also looking at how we multitask. So with the world of technology, we multitask a lot more. There's a lot more people doing calls and emails at the same time. They'll be dealing with computer systems as well as things go. So we're seeing a lot more of this multitasking focus than we did before. And while technology is great at enabling that, it does have some drawbacks when people are struggling. A lack of training on certain systems, which can make tasks harder. Some people will avoid systems if they don't understand them. And this can be a real inhibitor for them, because they will actively try and avoid certain things that actually would make their life easier if only they had a little bit more training on the matter. Feeling the need to work faster rather than spending time on analysis or creativity, where people are feeling this pressure a lot more. And what we talked about a bit earlier, where they're wanting to respond in real time, what we're seeing here is that people aren't analyzing information as thoroughly. They're not coming up with as many creative ideas because they're working in the now mode, where everything has to be done immediately. So what we're noticing is less idea generation. We're noticing a lot more, in some ways, a lot more productivity in terms of getting the day-to-day job done. But then it's looking at, well, how does this affect the more strategic view that we're working with? And one thing when we talk about systems is a lot of the time it's the jargon or the language that can be quite intimidating for people who aren't as familiar with technology. For example, if people talk about Python programming or C++, or they start talking about the files on Teams, some people will struggle with, or Zoom. For a lot of us, this has become part of our day-to-day world, but it took time for us to get there. But if we turn around to someone and say, okay, I want you to go on to Teams, I want you to go into the groups, I want you to find the files, and I want you to extract them, and you carry on a conversation like that, if they're not comfortable, automatically they might feel on the back foot and try to shy away from that activity. And this links really nicely to the last one, which is performance anxiety with regards to technology use and trying to avoid looking foolish or unable to complete tasks. This is something that we noticed a lot of. And when I talked about dopamine earlier, we like to get rewarded for doing good jobs, and being praised, having positive feedback is something we really relate to. But when you're faced with a problem or a technology that you don't understand, then you're not going to want to engage out of fear of looking stupid or foolish or incompetent. So people try to find workarounds. And this is something that is quite common, especially when the people who are moving towards the later stages of their careers are starting to engage with technologies they've never had to before. Likewise, for people entering businesses for the first time, some of the language and usage of systems is quite intimidating. So I'm just going to stop there for a moment. And I'm going to ask to put you into breakout rooms. I'd like to have a discussion of actually what does Technostress mean to you? What are your experiences of it? What have you seen? And what we're going to do is we're going to give you 10 minutes to have a bit of a conversation around it. And then we will have 10-minute discussion about each of those points. And then what we will do is we will carry on looking at some of the additional information. So Alexandra, can I just ask you to put people into breakout rooms, please?
Yep. How many rooms would you like?
Can I get 10, please?
Okay, yeah. I'm working on that right now. It'll take about a minute.
No worries. Does anyone have any questions at all? No worries.
Okay. Sorry, I just need to pull you out of the room. Sorry, I just need to pull you out of the room and then we'll be on our way.
No worries. And what we'll do, guys, when we come back, we'll talk about more of these things, and we will get to coping strategies and things like that. But it's just nice to hear a bit of a personal side of it, of exactly what your experiences have been. And then that way we can use it to kind of give a bit of framework and grounding to what we'll be discussing at a later point. So welcome back, everyone. Hope that wasn't too traumatic. I'd just like to really give you this opportunity now. So rather than me rambling on for the next hour or so and probably putting all of you to sleep, what are some of the experiences you guys had a conversation with, if you're happy sharing? Was there anything that struck a particular chord with you, something that you all agreed on?
Hi, Matthew. It's Anna. I think I was in room 4. We had Technostress immediately because I think the group that I was with are not as familiar with Zoom. We're more teams, so we couldn't get ourselves off mute. So we were having our conversation via the chat.
Absolutely. And it is that thing where it doesn't have to be this manic example of some sophisticated knowledge. It can literally just be, where's the mute gone? And do you know what? I'm very fortunate. I work with some fantastic people. And we had that where someone couldn't find the camera button and then couldn't find the mute button. And then it was just it was a great big palaver. It was one of those interesting things, but it can be as simple as that. So thank you for sharing, Anna.
No problem.
Anyone else had any examples?
I'm Claire. I was in room 9 with a few others. I think the main thing that came out of our chat was boundaries, and managing boundaries with technology is problematic, because even though we try and do it, there's always the temptation to break those boundaries because of stresses for various different reasons, and the need to feel connected all the time and worried about when you're not.
Absolutely. And that is so key now, especially where you can be contacted 24 hours a day, whether we like it or not sometimes. And sometimes you have a busy day at work, and then you go back and actually your personal life is actually what's stressing you out, because everyone wants to contact you or speak to you. So it's really key. So thank you for sharing it. That's a really good one. So thank you, Claire. Tina, I saw you put your hand up.
Yeah, in our group, thank you for coming to me. We talked about the kind of multiple channels since going virtual, and Teams and WebEx spaces and WhatsApp chats and emails, and how you can kind of feel quite concerned and stressed because you miss something because it's posted somewhere and you can't quite remember where it is, and just how that's impacting people on a day-to-day basis, and trying to be across it all can be a stressor in itself.
Absolutely, and completely agree with you, Tina. Sometimes you spread yourself too thin to try and do everything, and then you realize, actually, I can't. I just don't have the capacity. I think a lot of us do struggle with that, and it goes almost a little bit back to those boundaries, looking at perhaps technologies we're not familiar with. Some technologies we can look at for 5 minutes and we know exactly what we're doing, and others it can take a lot longer. So thank you for that, Tina. Jenny, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, so we sort of echoing that thing about sort of user error or user competence. We were talking about, whilst you're working from home, it's not like you can go down the corridor and speak to IT and ask them a question, and obviously you're sort of sat at home and you're kind of really out on a limb and you can't directly speak to someone, but you can't do what you need to do, and the whole experience could end up being quite frustrated if you've got maybe a couple of hours where you lose your productivity, you lose your flow of what you were doing.
Absolutely, and I think the one thing that no one realized was when saved files go missing. I think that's the one that everyone's been struggling with over lockdown, when that one file that you've been working on for too long just disappears, and then you can't quickly go and ask IT where it's gone. So absolutely, that's a great one to share. Thank you, Jenny. Anyone else got anything they'd like to add in?
This is Brittany. In our group, it seemed that we were probably too connected. So like having the emails on your phone, and then also just, you're working during the day and then you still come back at night and you're still looking at emails because you feel this need to respond and to keep up. And depending on, where you are, like, for example, for myself, I work internationally. So I have people from other time zones contacting me. So feeling like you have to respond, I think, is the more stressful thing, and that you can just see it at any time. Like you can, before you go to bed or on your lunch. And it's just this constant technology overload. And then are you really getting, the best concentration that you need out of it, and kind of coming up with ways of disconnecting, but it's almost like your brain's still kind of going. It's just in hibernation mode.
Absolutely, and that is so common. I think a lot of people I know have been you're conditioned to look at your work phone, or if you have got a big deadline or lots of things on, sometimes you are thinking about them while you're meant to be relaxing. So this boundary between does start to disappear. And I know a lot of people who are, the 9-10 o'clock email, like the quick glance, they have a look at what's coming on tomorrow, has anything major happened, so they know how much coffee to have in the morning. So it's one of those things where it does start to creep in, and it can be quite overloading in just the fact that it's constant and there's no real escape from it. Absolutely, thank you.
Yes.
Zoe, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, so within our group, I mean, we talked about a lot of what everybody has mentioned here, but I think as well as your boundaries, it's about having self-discipline. And I shared that I have someone in the house that disciplines me rather than self-discipline myself. So I've had to learn to be a bit better at that. But also a member of our group mentioned, it's not just about the Technostress in the workplace, it's about feeling kind of obliged then to go on Facebook and LinkedIn and checking all those other applications when you've actually logged off. So it becomes more of a 24/7 thing.
Absolutely, and you're completely right there. It's not just a workplace thing, it is all the time. And actually there was a study that actually looked at whether the commute home was something beneficial for us. And if you go back about 10 years ago, it was more beneficial because we didn't have as many smartphones. there wasn't as much you could do on there. Everyone's constantly on their phones on the train now. So it's quite interesting to see how that has changed, and actually possibly how it will carry on changing as we move forward. That we're probably not going to see less technology in our lives moving forward. We're going to see more of it. We'll just have to learn to cope with it. So that was an interesting thing. Thank you for sharing that, Zoe. Anyone else got anything they want to add before we move on? No? Okay then, let me share up on my screen. So hopefully you can see my screen all okay. So we've talked about what is Technostress. You've given me some fantastic examples, so thank you very much for that. But why do we care? So, we're all there going, well, actually, I've noticed I'm having more technology in my life. It's affecting, I'm using it more. It's later at night. Sometimes I don't know how to use it, but why do we care? Well, actually, there are a lot of symptoms of technostress. And the most unfortunate thing is they often they snowball. So, for example, blue lights from screens can create difficulty sleeping. If you have difficulty sleeping, then you have difficulty concentrating the next day because you're tired. And this can make you more irritable. So, and then if that happens for a long period of time, we start to see things like burnout, not being able to concentrate for creative problem solving. So these are where some of these things can relate. And while we are looking at physical, mental, emotional symptoms, we have got other issues because they are technically sit outside those three symptom categories, but are a knock-on effect. One thing that I found very interesting when I was researching into this initially was actually how things like actually sore neck, back and shoulder muscles can be really exhausting for people because they're constantly thinking about, actually, this really hurts, or this is really uncomfortable. And that can lead to a bit of a mental exhaustion there. And then we start to see these feelings of isolation and frustration. Now, it doesn't always go physical, mental, and then emotional than other. They can go all over the place. So actually, negative attitude towards computers can create irritability if they're having to use it a lot. And then that can have knock-on effects as well. So it's a really interesting area. And one thing we really want to avoid is these other issues category, where we're looking at this work-life imbalance, reduced job satisfaction, less time for sustained thinking, general burnout. Those things are really, really key. And I think the most important thing to remember is this is not just a workplace instance. This happens outside as well. So it is that thing where it's good to remember that this can happen anywhere in your working day. And the other thing just to point out here is that while these are just some of the symptoms, there are others in there as well. But one that really, really was quite pertinent, especially because we're working remotely, was if you have low confidence or morale because actually you think you're not doing a good job, you can't use these tools, you might start feeling more isolated and frustrated, which can lead to things like insomnia if they are having those thoughts a lot. It can reduce job satisfaction, have all kinds of different areas on the more mental health side of things. So it's really important to kind of understand how some of these start to snowball. So, important things to remember. So, technostress is still part of the overall stress that you will go through on a day-to-day basis. It is classed as a stressor. However, the one thing that's quite interesting is technostress is classed as a negative stressor. So, technostress is never seen to, I should say, benefit your performance. It is only seen to actually cause things to become slightly worse. And I will show that a bit more on the stress performance curve in a minute. But this means we need to look at the impact of stresses on individuals before we can look at coping strategies. So I've got a nice quote here from Cooper, Dewar and O'Driscoll. who said that stressors are physical or psychological factors that push us beyond the range of stability. And that's really key to remember, is it doesn't have to be one big thing that causes, it can be lots of little things that add up. And throughout these days, we are going to be going through more than just techno stress. There'll be other stresses, the school run, getting to work, making sure your technology works. It could be, what's for dinner tonight? Do you need to go shopping? Have you got sports on that you need to do? All these kind of things start to roll together and create these stresses that can be going on at any one time. So, as promised, the stress performance curve. And I think this is a very interesting thing. So one thing that is interesting here is that this shows we do need some stress to perform at our peak performance. And that's something that a lot of people actually find quite surprising, is that if you have no stress, then I myself am definitely one of these where you don't want to motivate yourself to do as much. You are going through that. So while you are not under extreme stress, you will probably be performing at an okay pace. When we start to see a bit more stress, but it's in a healthy level, we're in this healthy, motivated, focused area, which is really where people is quite comfortable. But when we have deadlines and performance goals, then we start to go towards peak performance. And peak performance can be maintained from roughly about 3 months for the average person. So some people can, but what they do often need to do is go back towards that healthy bit. So they can do that 3-month sprints, and then it's good to go back a little bit. But technostress actually causes where we go from peak performance more towards sick. So what it's trying to do is it is actually pushing you beyond stability towards feeling perhaps fatigued, exhausted, some panic or anxiety. So that is something that I think is really important to remember with all stresses, but particularly technostress, is that no one ever goes, I'm really motivated by the fact that I can't use this technology. It really makes me want to try harder. Some people will want to learn more, and learning is one of their motivators, but no one gets motivated, or very few people get motivated when technology breaks and causes more issues. So it's also worth looking at motivation for this, because motivation will get affected by where you are on the stress performance curve. The one thing I would like to point out is that mental illness tends to be on this far more extreme kind of this anger, burnout, and breakdown disease category. And one thing that is really worth thinking about is what coping strategies are in place, because a coping strategy will serve to push you back from peak performance towards healthy, but sometimes even your coping strategies can become overwhelmed. And that's something that people can go through, and then it becomes a snowballing effect, where one thing will just lead to another, and it becomes harder and harder to pull yourself back. So, any questions on the stress performance curve? No? Okay. So, we've got traditional stress versus techno stress. So, traditional stress, some of you may have seen this model. So, it looks at psychological demands and control over your environment. So, if we have low control but low demands, we can be quite passive, which is when we were looking at the stress performance curve, is that the more further to the left hand side. If we have low demands and high control, it's low straining work, so something you can do, but perhaps it's not pushing you to your peak. We've got high strain, which is when you have high demands but low control. And that's when you're at risk of strain and physical illness, when actually your demands are so great, but you can't do much to control how you're dealing with them. So you're just kind of rolling with the punches a little bit there. And then if you have high demands and high control, this is where learning, motivation, and developing new behavioral patterns and ideas starts to occur. So that is how people deal with stress in terms of dealing with demands due to how much control they've got. But when we face technostress, it actually can be an inhibitor or an enabler. So technology is there to try and help us have a greater control over anything we're doing with. So emails, things like that can be really, really useful. But when technology is not helping and is a stressor, it causes this high strain. And actually, this is where we start to see the more mental health side, the more physical illness, the anxiety, the panic, the low job satisfaction, bad work-life balance, all start to come in when technology is an inhibitor rather than an enabler. So that's just something I wanted to point out about how technostress is slightly different and how it actually impacts stress. Does anyone have any questions around that at all? Nope. Okay then. So I've talked about what technostress is, and I've talked about what this might look like in real life, and I've talked about some of the models. But now I want to talk to you about coping strategies themselves and talking about how all these different things start to come together. So forgive me for the analogy, but people are like a bridge. I think it's really important to remember that just like a bridge, there is only so much pressure an individual can go under. So there are a couple of things you can do. So you can put coping strategies in place and they will give support to the bridge, almost like extra struts to kind of help it hold itself up. However, if lots of load is going on the top, eventually, no matter what you put underneath, it will collapse. So what we are going to talk about is how to have more support when you're going through technostress and other types of stresses as well. And then what that can allow you to do is work on what is causing the weight to be on the top to stop the bridge collapsing. So some little things to be thinking about. So I am in a minute going to ask you to jump back into the breakout rooms and have a little bit of discussion about some of these. I will give some follow-up actions and we will have a bit of discussion, but there's a couple of things here I want to discuss before we do. So some of the most useful coping techniques for dealing with technostress is learning to become self-aware with regards to technology, reducing your multitasking, so focusing on one task at a time. That's actually been found to increase not only the standard of work, but also the pressure people feel from it. Exercising, picking up or starting a hobby that doesn't involve too much screen time. I think lots of people have started things like knitting or drawing, which has been very interesting to see how that has developed. Managing exposure time to technology. So looking at when you're using this technology, what does the usage actually look like? Trying to avoid digital interaction during certain times. So the other thing is, although we've spoken about nights, right during a meal, for example, can be quite difficult. And a lot of people do find that they do use technology during a meal, which does have impact on digestion and stimuli response and things like that. Turning digital devices off when not in use. This particularly goes for things like work phones and computers, or sometimes even when you're at work, your own personal phone, just because it can be an extra thing on top where more people are trying to contact you. Trying to minimize the impact of work technology in your work-life balance. So the reason we're focusing on work technology there is because when you're at work, you're there to work. And when you're at home, lots of people are now bringing that work technology home. And the last one is mindfulness, which has actually been found to be really effective when dealing with a lot of these stressors. And going through them, it has been found to reduce cortisol levels, increase dopamine. It's been shown to be very effective. So what I'd like you guys to do is just have a bit of a discussion around some possible follow-up actions and coping strategies you feel might be useful when dealing with technostress. We'll put it in for about 10 minutes and then we'll have a chat and I'll give you some strategies to take away at the end of it. So if I could hand over and get everyone in a breakout room, that'd be great. Welcome back, everyone. So a little bit of a discussion then. Thank you for indulging me with the breakout rooms. I know some people love them, some people hate them. But what kind of coping strategies were people talking about? Did anyone come up with anything that they hadn't thought of before today, or did everyone have things they'd already had in place? Over to you guys.
Yeah.
Anything in particular?
Sorry, so I've got one, Matthew. So we were talking about I introduced it probably about sort of 6 or 7 years ago, where we don't have mobile phones at the table at all. So when we're eating our dinner or breakfast and stuff, we just don't have them. And it's a written rule in our house. Yeah, we just don't have it. It just gives us that time in the evening or in the morning to talk about how the day's going to go or how the day's gone. Yeah, I mean, the minute the dinner's over, they scurry away to find their phones, and then that's fine. But I've said to them, and as I say, we've had this in place for quite some years now, and they just got used to it. They just know they come to the table without their mobile phones.
Absolutely. And you know what, that's really good because it does give you a bit of breathing space, and it's nice to talk to people.
Absolutely.
Rather than text them. Far easier. I have to do less typing and there's no spelling mistakes and those kind of things, which could be quite good. So that's a fantastic one. Thank you for sharing that one. It's nice to see it's still implemented. Anyone else got anything? Jenny?
Yeah, so in our group, we were talking about the difference in discipline. So when you're in the office, and especially if you're commuting home, you have that time to decompress. You can reflect on your day. You can, maybe start figuring out a to-do list for the following day and all that kind of thing. And by the time you've done that and you've got home, you're maybe less inclined to open up the laptop, have a look at your work emails, because you've already done it in your mind and you think, well, I'll just pick it back up again the following morning. And then one of the other things that one of the other participants said was about, irrespective of what the weather's doing and what your priorities are, have half an hour in the day. Doesn't have to be in lunchtime. It could be when you finished the day if you're working from home. But have half an hour where you go out for a walk, or you change your scenery, you do something different. And again, it's just so you can kind of get your brain into a slightly different mode. So you've gone from I'm in work mode to I'm now out of work mode, and try and switch the emphasis as far as your brain's concerned.
Absolutely. And it's quite interesting because people do become conditioned to think, well, actually, this is the work room. When I'm in this room, I do work. And a lot of people at the start of lockdown actually used their living rooms and thought, oh, this is great. I can sit on the sofa and work. And what they were then quickly were finding was they were actually becoming stressed sitting in the living room because they started thinking about work. And then they were just trying to watch TV, but they know that they work in there. There might be some work papers, on the floor or a notepad or whatever it was. And actually that was having an impact on people's stress responses. So that's absolutely agree that getting out is really good. And actually, we're meant to step away from our computers once an hour for 10 minutes to give yourself a little bit of, give your eyes a chance to readjust. I don't know how many people actually manage to do that. I know I struggle to do that just with how busy I get. But it's quite interesting how the guidance and the guidelines have changed.
And another important point is we are saving on our travel time. So we should utilize that time to ensure that the stress is not there. If we are not using that time, then certainly we are spending more time in front of the screens, even though we have more hours in our day compared to when we travel.
Absolutely. And it's that thing where, thank you for sharing that, by the way, that the commute that we were doing and we got so used to, I think lots of people did have a kind of a hard reset of they finished and went, oh, I've got an hour that I can do something with that I would be traveling back right about now. What do I do with it? And some people did, and are using it for mindfulness. They're using it for meditation. They're using it for exercise, walking, all those great things. So absolutely, that's a fantastic point. Anyone else got anything they wish to share?
I'll just add, unfortunately, some of our participants couldn't get off mute. So we had a little bit going on in chat and face to face, but personally for me, I started like gardening, growing my own. I'm a regular gym goer anyway, but as I was talking about, oh yes, I go to the gym to de-stress, I realized that I do plug in to the machines at the gym. So you're not totally away from technology, but I don't look at my phone. I keep my phone separate, so I'm not checking my phone through my gym session, whereas I'm aware lots of other people are doing that whilst in the gym. We set our alarms on our laptops to notify us to get up.
Maybe
and kind
Apple
of
Watch
move
also.
around. I just don't know whether I do that as often as I should. If I hear the alarm go off, sometimes I don't take notice of it. That's the problem. But there were lots of things on that slide that you shared previously. I do the majority of them, but something that a lot of my colleagues have got into is mindfulness, what you mentioned. And I keep saying to myself, I need to do it, but I keep talking myself out of it, saying that I just don't have the time. And I know I do, it's just actually disciplining myself to do it, really.
Absolutely, and there's some fantastic points, and it is very true that actually, although we have gained more time, we've also got more to do. I remember running this session and someone went, actually, I know how much more housework I still need to do, and I keep putting it away, but now that I can't travel, I can't get away from it. So I found that was very interesting, how just day-to-day life responsibilities start flowing into everything else. That's a really good, and also like you said with the gym, you know, again, your endorphins going, you're releasing dopamine, your cortisol levels are going down, all those hormones and neurotransmitters in your body, you're having a really positive effect on. So absolutely, those are some good ones. Anyone else got anything?
Hi, Matthew. I was in room 4. One of the participants said, just change your mindset that HR is not an emergency service. And we were all like, thought about that and thought, actually, that's true. You know, if someone's got a genuine emergency, they'll call someone else. So you don't have to be hyper connected constantly. It can wait quite often, you know. So that's something that I've taken away from our conversation.
And it is that thing where you're dealing with overload, that dealing with now is sometimes it is difficult to distance yourself when someone goes, right, I need an answer from you right this moment. Actually, you'll have other things going on as well. You've got another job, you've got responsibilities and things to do. So that's really important to remember. So absolutely. Anyone else got anything they wish to add? No. Okay then. So we are coming towards the end. Thank you very much for engaging in the breakout rooms. It just helps bring the session a little bit more to life rather than me talking at you for an hour and a half and probably putting you all to sleep. So some strategies for you to take away. So practice relaxation. Now, everyone goes, I know how to relax. But one thing that people have noticed is that, for example, if you're watching a film, how often does your phone come out, or do you check your phone during a film or when you're watching television with friends or family or anyone? It's really important, and try to limit how much you use that technology. It can be really, really important. So what I really think when you're looking at this is to just be aware that when you're having those moments to step away, have those thoughts, you can just limit that technology usage. Set those boundaries. It's really, really important to have those boundaries. Often we do get swept up, and sometimes where we've got the extra time given back to us by not commuting, some of us are more willing than others to put that time into projects or ideas. Make sure your boundaries are there in giving you that break. And next point is pay attention to how you're feeling and if you need that break. There's nothing wrong with stepping away for 5 minutes. How many times did we used to go grab a coffee or go grab a glass of water? We had those small little breaks throughout our day, but now we're more virtual. How often do you give yourself a chance for that? Ensure you manage your time on social media effectively. I think we've all discovered how YouTube or Facebook or anything like that can suck loads of time away from people. And I think we've all heard the stories of people who go on YouTube and spend about 3 hours watching cat videos. So especially at the start of lockdown. So that's just one thing to be aware of, and educate yourself if there's something you do not understand. There is a lot of resources out there on how to get around issues. So if you're facing a system, a piece of software you don't understand, can you get it from YouTube, LinkedIn Learning? Is there a tutorial online from another, or from the governing body who release it? All those different things can be really useful. Again, taking breaks. So I'm taking breaks to step away from technology, maybe not to get a glass of water. Actually look out a window. Just give yourself a couple of minutes. One thing that we found really interesting was write things down when you are coming up with ideas rather than on a Word document. They actually found that creativity is so much greater when you are writing it down than you are typing it into Word or Notepad or anything like that, because you can actually design things to actually be more effective in how you work. Slow down and concentrate on one task at a time. Often when we're being bombarded with multiple requests, it's really good to slow down and go, right, one task at a time. Be engaged in what you are doing and fully enjoy it, whether it be the gym, mindfulness, meditation, cooking, gardening, whatever it is, whatever you are taking enjoyment from, engage with it, focus on it. Try not to let your mind focus on, oh, I just should check my work phone, or, oh, I've got about 50 emails, I need to answer them all. And that does tie into break the cycle of being available 24 hours a day. That is something that a lot of us go through at the moment, where we expect to be bombarded by technology. So it's good just to be aware of that. And also, when you are facing lots of emails, take a moment and just allow yourself to reflect. When someone might come at you, and like you said, with an urgent email, don't respond instantly. Don't do that impulse response that we're often prone to doing because we just have to do things quickly. Just take a moment, take a 5-second pause, and just process that information. So those are a couple of takeaway strategies for you guys. And finally, from me, is thank you very much for listening. And if you have any questions around Technostress, I would be happy to answer. Thank you very much, guys.